Howdy, kids. A little video here about the Book of Shadows. As usual, it's my job to have a long memory. I do come from an older tradition, and that tradition was very traditional, almost fundamentalist in their traditionalness. And the Book of Shadows was very specific. I'm pretty active on Facebook, and I get in these discussion groups, and the question often comes up, and a lot of differing opinions. So I want to make this video first for you, my loyal viewers, but also so next time somebody asks that question on one of those forums, I can just post the video, and it saves you from having to type a whole lot. So that's my motivation here. But without further ado, the Book of Shadows, as I learned it when I was a kid, was the one book that you would catalog all the particulars of your particular tradition. The idea was that it was to be so complete with everything that you might possibly need, in addition to all the particulars of your tradition, the deities involved, the rituals involved, the lore involved, laws, rules, regulations of your tradition, particulars. Also maybe a listing of herbs, some spells that worked, although those more often go in a magical notebook or a grimoire, which is a whole different thing. And I see that getting confused a lot. A grimoire is more often used in ceremonial and high magic, and some other traditions use it. There are some witches that do use it. A grimoire is more like your own personal magical spell book. After you've worked out your spells in your notebook, figured out what worked, put them in your grimoire. Keep them in your grimoire. But the Book of Shadows, first of all, we were taught when I was a kid that the reason they call it the Book of Shadows is because once upon a time, some of our ancestors believed that they were the only witches left alive. This seems to be the opinion of Gerald Gardner when he first started working with the New Forest witches. They thought they were the last witches left alive because through the dark times there was no communication, and people were in hiding for their beliefs. Prior to all of that burning times and persecution and all the wonderful sad history that we pagans like to moan on and on about, these were oral traditions passed down hand to mouth, mother to daughter, father to son, or vice versa, passed down through the tribe. And we take it back to the original Celtic ideas. The bards believed that it destroyed a story to ever write it down, and it was a terrible thing to do. So the Book of Shadows is to remind us that, it comes about during sad times. It comes about during the dark times of our ancestors, that they were so scared to believe that they were the last of their kind alive, they had to write down their systems so that they wouldn't be lost. And it seems to occur around the same time. People get the same idea, start writing things down that had been oral traditions before, because the church had destroyed so much. So the reason it's called a Book of Shadows is to remind us of that. Now, in my tradition's Book of Shadows, a lot of the book was laying out the organizational structure of covens, groups of covens, the duties of priests, priestesses, high priests, high priestesses, the coveners, the organizational structure of that. And then a lot of the Book of Shadows that I grew up with was, a lot of the rest of it, it's kind of a manual of how to hide from the church. Things like not putting any marks on your ritual tools, which is pretty common. We tend to, carve our witch names on things, but traditionally, in my tradition, you didn't do that because you wanted to hide them. Things like, I remember a line in there, let the blade be the same shape and make of the kitchen blades and be stored with them. Let the cord be commonly seen around the house and used for a vulgar purpose to fool the infidels. As an exact quote from the book Shadows. I have it all right up here, and I still have my book of Shadows. I'm hopefully going to, in this video, include a page from the book of Shadows just to show you something that was really important that they taught in the book of Shadows. Great advice that I did not follow. The book should be written in ink that should be long-lived. Dragon's Blood ink is excellent for this kind of thing. In a pinch, a magic marker, or those fine-tipped magic marker, the Sharpies or the really thin Sharpies, that's ink that should be long-lived. That's not going to wash out. But, I wrote some pages with a Bic, and Bics, from what I understand, Bics are much better than they were back then, but my book survived fire, flood, mud, and probably wind. And as a result, I had to retrace over many almost lost words, and hopefully I can include that picture there. So the Book of Shadows was a traditional thing. Now if you're a solitaire, that takes on a whole different meaning. You're making your own tradition out of the pieces you find along the way. Think about that, organize that. Another really important advice that I've always given about the book of Shadows is if you can find a type of book that you can add, remove, or rearrange pages on. God, the camera's just totally shaking. Rearrange pages on. Excellent advice. My book of Shadows is like filled with road maps. It's like you'd be reading, and then something stops and says, continued on page 46, because I'd go on to something else and start writing it, and then eventually I'd get back to the other thing I was on, spiraling around, touching on things, finding things. And so my book, you're jumping all over the fucking place just to keep up with it. So if you can get a kind of book where you can remove the pages, move them around, it's great advice. Ink that shall be long-lived, also great advice. The other thing, traditionally, again in my tradition, the book was black and silver. It tended to be a leather-bound book with silver writing on it, because those were seen as the colors of the craft. Silver being the color of the moon, black being the color of the night, and of course the dark moon. But black and silver were the traditional colors of the craft for those old traditions. And the idea with that was that it could be readily found in your library if you had to grab it and run from the mob with torches banging down your door. Scary times. The Book of Shadows comes about during scary times, and traditional books of shadows have a lot of scary stuff in them. Now we in my tradition, which is branched off from my parent tradition, we still teach that, and we learn that Book of Shadows word by word, and people copy down those words word by word, and we talk about them like it's it's interesting history that our ancestors had to hide so much, and they were so scared of persecution and going to the stake. But as time's gone on, we see those not as just historical points of interest. Here, I don't know where you live, but here in America, scary, dark times, and the really crazy church people rear their ugly heads all the time. And history does repeat itself, and even though we've come a long way, we absolutely could end up in the burning times again, which is why I recommend, pagans have guns. But that's a whole other issue. But never think that those times can't come again. And I guess that's my rant on the Book of Shadows. Looks like I, said 10 minutes worth of stuff, so I hope it was some good stuff. And now I'll be able to just post this on those forums when the subject arises. Now, it's been fun. I'll see you again. Merry meet, merry part. Merry meet again, y'all.